Hello. We're going to start. Welcome, everyone. My name is Anita, and I'm from Kogan. If you haven't heard of Kogan before, Australia's biggest e-commerce platform, and we're really excited to have you guys here today. So we've got a really awesome lineup of speakers. First up, we've got Michael from Lexicon, and he's going to be talking to us about feature toggling.
All right. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I am Michael Peyper from Lexicon. Some of you may also be aware that I'm the author of the React Hooks testing library, and I've been maintaining that for a few years. But I'm not talking about that at all tonight, which is a bit weird as it's a React meetup. Instead, I'll be talking to you about feature toggling. So what I'm going to be covering tonight is I'll be giving an overview of what feature toggles are. I'll be showing a few different ways you can use feature toggles, giving you some tips and tricks to use them more effectively. And there'll be time for questions, and there's a few discussions in there, which is more an opportunity for me to take a drink than anything else. All right, so firstly, there's a couple of different categories of feature toggles, there's 4 of them. So the first one is release management. So these toggles are used to help us roll features out to production safely and effectively. You can run experiments using feature toggles. This is more like an extension of release management toggles. And kill switches. So a lot of companies will use them to turn off functionality by design when their system's getting a little bit overloaded. And you can also be running permissions through feature toggles as well, turning things on and off for different users at runtime. This presentation mainly covers release management. So it's everything that I'm talking about is framed in this sense, and I won't really be covering anything else there. So just keep that in mind. All right, so this is the problem that we're trying to solve. We have a main branch, which is what gets released to production, and we have 2 feature streams being built out. And so what happens is feature 1 does a couple of commits, feature 2 starts, it does its own commit, and it thinks it's ready, and it goes to the main branch ready for release. And then there's another commit against feature 1, and it also goes to main branch is ready to release. But then they discover a problem with feature 2, and then they make a few more commits, and they are now ready to go. Now, when feature 1 wants to release, they have a problem. There's a broken commit in the main branch. They have to work out whether or not it's safe for them to release, and go and talk to the other team, work out what's happening, and likely they're going to have to wait for feature 2 to be ready. That's not too bad at this point when there's only 2 and teams can talk to each other. But when you roll this out and you get to 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 feature streams, it can become a big problem, and you get to a point where no one can ever really release anything because they're always blocked by some other changes in the branch. So a lot of people will then turn to feature branching, and they'll say that's the solution to this problem. We're going to have feature branches, and we won't merge anything to main until we are absolutely convinced that it's safe to release. So we have the same commits as before. The changes go out to feature 1 and feature 2 as they do, and then feature 1's ready to release. So they go out and they merge to main, and they push that to production, and then feature 2 now has to merge those changes into their branch. And this is where things start to go wrong again. They discover problems. They realize there's conflicts in the code, someone's changed something, and then they have to make a whole bunch of changes and retest everything that they do. So for me, this has problems as well. So what is the solution? feature toggles. Without deploying any code, without making any changes, I was able to turn the feature on and show you this content. So we can modify the behavior without modifying the code, and that's gives us a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility to roll features out and merge our code to the main branch more often without all the headaches. And it really boils down to a Boolean. So we've got, if the thing is enabled, we do the new thing, and if it's not enabled, we do the old thing. It's a pretty basic concept to wrap your head around. And so it allows us to do something more like this. Now, I'll just highlight that these lines in between the merges to main don't actually exist in this model. It's just my diagram tool, I couldn't get rid of them. So they're there. But the idea is that every time we thought the feature was ready to go out, we merge to main. We have our feature toggle and we just merge to main. Every time we have a commit that we think can go to production, we merge it to main. And every time we want to make a new commit, we branch off main again, and we make more commits and we merge back to main. So at this point, when feature 1 wants to release, they just turn their toggle on. And they don't have to worry about anything that feature 2 has been doing because they're toggled off. And then similarly, when feature 2 is ready to go, they just release as soon as they're ready. No conversations, no questions, they're ready to go. Now you might have picked up a little bit from some of the words I was using before about integrating code, merging more frequently, maybe some might say continuously. What we're really talking about doing is enabling continuous integration and continuous delivery. And so what I mentioned before, from a pull request, we merge the code straight to main, and we're going to kick off a bunch of deployments to environments. And then we use the feature toggles to control in those environments which features are available and which features are not. And you can have whatever gates you want on those environments. You can deploy directly to dev automatically and then have manual deploys to all of the other environments if you want to. Or if you're living in that utopia where every commit goes straight to production, that's great too. I have not been able to work anywhere yet that has that luxury, but if you do, all power to you. Okay, so putting the Boolean in the code, if the feature is enabled or not, is only part of the problem. The other part is actually how do we configure these toggles. So we need some way of saying per environment what's on and what's off. And there's lots of different ways to solve this. I've got a few of my favorites here. So your config file, most applications at some point, when they get big enough, they end up with a config file for their environments. Great place to put this. Put a key in your config that has all of your features in it. Environment variables, fantastic place. It's kind of in the name, right? We want to control things per environment. We have environment variables. So a really good place to be controlling your feature toggles. My hot tip for you is to prefix them with feature so that you know that they're feature flags. And if you're sorting them in your .env file or something like that, they all get sorted together. You can stick them in your database, another good place, handy place to put them, or any key value store that you might already be using in your stack. And then we just control them. So here's a couple of config files for all of my different environments. You can see here I've got 2 feature toggles in my system, and I've got one that's already released. So it's true in all of the environments. And then I've got a new feature. I'm building something new. And so for this one, I have it set true in my local environment, just while I'm developing it. And then when I think it's ready, for the other developers to get their hands on it, I can turn it on in dev. And then, I can leave it there, toggle off everywhere else. No one else has to worry about it. We're happy with it as developers. We think, yep, this is really good. We want it's past QA. All checks and balances are good. Because this is ready for our users to test. We can give this out for some UAT testing. And so we can then turn it on here. And then, maybe at this point, the users are testing it and they're sort of all happy with it. Maybe there's a dependency somewhere, so we're not quite ready to go to production yet. But then someone from the sales team comes to you and says, hey, I've got this client that I think they'll come on board if we can just show them that new feature you're building. You can go, yep, no worries at all. We're going to turn this on in the demo environment, and they can go and have a look at it as well. And then we're ready to release. So in our pre-prod environment, we can set that to true, and we can make sure we can practice our release. This is all the release actually is. The code's already gone out at some point, so our release becomes turn the toggle on. Does it appear in staging? Fantastic. And then the release becomes really, really simple, and we can go, yep, it's on in production now. Everything happens. So my first tip for you for the night is, before I had just a basic Boolean, if it's enabled or not, wrap that up into a function. Encapsulate it into a function and hide away any complexity you have in your check. It does a couple of things. It improves the readability of your code. This is feature enabled. It's really, really clear to me what is happening here. You can change the implementation more easily. So if you have any specific checks you want to do to work out whether or not a feature is enabled, we can wrap it up in there, and all of the features that we have in the system can get the benefit of that. And if you are using types and TypeScript, it makes it really easy to spot issues. So if I fat-fingered this, we'll get a little error there saying you've got an issue with your types there. And it also helps us with cleanup. If we come along and this gets removed, we also get told all the places in the code that I need to go and remove that toggle. All right, first discussion. So I want you guys to have a think about this, maybe turn to the person next to you and talk about it. When doesn't feature toggling make sense? I'm gonna have a quick drink. All right, that's long enough. All right, so these are my thoughts on that question. If you're not integrating code often, there's not a lot of point feature toggling. It's all about managing the risks of integrating code. If you're working solo on a small team, maybe it's a bit more overhead than you need. You can probably get away with just having conversations between people. If nothing's live yet, if you're building out something and no one's actually using it, then a lot of that risk is mitigated already. If it's just minor styling updates, so if the change you're making isn't really going to have catastrophic effects, if it went out, changing the color of a button or something like that, probably not worth feature toggling. And hot fixing production bugs. Just fix the bug. Just fix it. Get on with it. All right. So now I'm going to talk about a few different types of toggles. So first, and the most basic of feature toggles, well, I've shown you already, Boolean toggles. So this is true or false. It's on or it's off. They're really, really simple. I consider it the smallest unit of a toggle, if you want to think of it that way. It's very, very easy for everyone on the team and product owners and all these sort of people to understand true or false, on or off. Next one I've got is date toggles. Now, to me, this is the most underused and underrated feature toggle out there. They're very, very handy to set and forget. So you can put, when you add the feature toggle and you know what date you want it to go live, you can add it in early and you don't have to do anything after that. It will turn itself on as soon as the date passes. It's really, really handy. It's good for timing with real world events. So, end of financial year, the company's birthday, Christmas, those sort of things. If you've got a sale starting on a particular day, something like that, useful to Another thing that they can be used for, if you don't think of the date that you're comparing against as today, and you want to use an effective date of a process, it can be very, very handy if you're backdating any processing. So you can use the old functionality that would have existed on a particular date, and then anything run today would use the new functionality. A lot of financial services run into that problem of having to use last year's legislation when they run their accounts, their balances and things. But beware of time zones. So particularly if you're going to evaluate these on the front end, the person that's using your system might not be where you are, and the date might be different for them. So just keep that in mind. Version toggles. So this one actually bit me recently. It's not something I ever thought about, but I was working on a mobile app. And one of the annoying things about mobile apps is you don't control when it necessarily updates. So if you've been releasing code into the app, constantly, continuously releasing that code, and you turn it on with a true and it goes on, anyone that's running the old version of the app are going to get some broken clown version of the feature because they don't get half the code there. So stick to the version number. Tell it which version of the app needs to be running to show this feature. It's also handy if you're running to a product roadmap. If you know this feature is part of a bigger scope of work and it's only going to be released with a particular version of your application, it can be handy to group multiple features together to release at the same time. And just remember Semver semantics. You don't want it to turn off again on the next patch release because you are strictly checking for version 1.2.3. And user toggles. So with this one, we extended the is feature enabled to accept our user, and now we can make smarter choices about when the feature is on or off. So in my little example here, I'm using the username, and I'm saying, for this alpha feature that we've got, we're only going to give it to user 1 and user 2. And then this beta feature is available to the entire company. So this is handy if you want to roll features out incrementally to smaller segments of users, and then slowly increase the number of people that are going to see it. So if you want early feedback on something, give it to your your favorite person at your company and let them tell you what they think of it. All right, so that's all the different types of toggles that I'm going to talk about. There are others that there is more. They're the most useful ones, but feel free to experiment with them. So now I'm going to talk about feature toggles as a service. So this is extending on where we store our toggles. So rather than having them tied to our application, we actually extract them out into their own service and make them available externally to the application. I'm going to specifically talk about one called Launch Darkly, which is probably the biggest player in this game, definitely the one everyone evaluates at some point. And the main reason is that they've been doing it for a long time. They have any type of toggle that I've spoken about tonight and more available just out of the box. You've got access to them. They have a really nice UI, really nice interface for managing the toggles, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the developers coming out to update the config files and push out those toggles. You can give access to your product owner and let them control when the feature goes out or who gets access to it. Give it to your sales team to turn it on specifically for the demos that they're running. And it can also do a whole bunch of other things. Different toggling strategies, percentage-based rollouts, and things like that. So A/B testing, experiments, all sorts of things comes packaged in with it. And I'm going to have to switch over here to show you. I've got this little example here. So it's not all roses. So I'm just going to toggle this on here. I've got a couple of cons there. It is quite expensive. I'm not going to lie to you. I've seen it be evaluated quite a few times, and it always falls down to the commercials. No one goes forward with it. It's probably quite good for smaller companies. It won't be too bad, but larger companies are going to definitely feel the sting. And you can't run it on premise if that's important to you. It's cloud only. There are a couple of other players in that game. Unleashed is a open source version that you can run for free. So if you are thinking about feature toggles as a service, look at that one as well. All right, my next tip for you, testing toggles. It's very, very important to test the toggles on and off. I've seen many teams fall down where they make the changes they need, all the tests pass, and they keep going. And then when they go to remove that toggle, they realize that they only ever tested it in the off state. And that's not where you want to be. If you're going to test one side of it, test the on state, that's where you're going. Don't worry about the off state, but it's not difficult to test it on both sides. Easiest way to do it, take your existing test suite, wrap a suite around it with it toggled off, set off, and that becomes the off version of your tests. Then you create the toggled on version and make whatever changes you need to get your tests to pass. All right, second discussion of the night. My chance for a second drink. How many toggles should you have? Discuss. All right, that's long enough. All right, it was somewhat of a trick question. There isn't a number. It's as many as you need to feel confident that you're releasing your features as you need to. I will add that I don't think you necessarily need one per feature. It's the granularity that you're going to need to turn things on and off as you're going to need to. It's a case by case, but keep it as low as you can. And this is why. So make sure you are cleaning up your toggles regularly. As soon as you add a toggle to the system, put a ticket in your backlog to remove it again and track it. Keep an eye on it. If you get too many, start playing them. Toggles, because what you end up happening is toggles will depend on other toggles existing, and that is a nightmare scenario to find yourself in. Particularly when we had before there with the tests and we're toggling the on and off states of one feature toggle. If you have two feature toggles that's needed, you're going to have to test on and on and off and on, off and off. Right? That's how you're going to have confidence. You add that, you get more and more feature toggles in place, and it's a pain. It's a real pain. I've been there. I've had hundreds of toggles still existing in the system, and all of that code has to be maintained. All the code in the off branches still needs to be maintained, particularly if you're working in a typed language and you update a type that's used in the off branch. You're going to have to maintain all that code. So be vigilant, get rid of them as soon as you don't need them. As soon as they're on, get rid of them. Maybe leave them for like a sprint just in case you need to turn it off again. All right, my next load of tips. Optimize for cleanup. So this is some code that I saw at a client. Don't worry to anyone here from Lexicon. It's not the exact code. I wrote it from memory, roughly what it looked like. No judgment to the code that was there. It worked. It was fine. It did toggle how it needed to do. But let's have a look at what happens when we want to remove the offer modal feature toggle. That's a scary diff for me when you're removing code, when you just want to delete something, delete a branch of a code. There's a lot kind of going on here. There's a bit of refactoring happening down here. We had the offer modal call here that had to move down here. Just generally, there's too many changes. I don't feel comfortable anymore that this code is going to work as it did with the toggle on. Let's compare it to this version. So in this version, I've preferred duplication. I know there's some things there that I could have cleaned up, I could have refactored and made it read nicer with the toggle in place. But when we look at the diff of this version, it's all red. That's what you want when you're removing toggles. You want all red. You want a sea of red. Because it becomes very clear to me, reading this, what has changed. What am I looking at that is being removed and what is staying? So very, very nice way. If you're reviewing this cleanup, it's easy to do. There's another technique that's called branch by abstraction. And the idea is that it's quite similar to before, but we have wrapped the feature toggle in account balance here, and then we have some abstractions of what the alternatives are there. And then with this one, when we look at that diff, it becomes even clearer that this is what's left. It is exactly the same as what was there before. You don't have to panic about this diff. All right, so I'm getting very close to the end, so I'm going to do a quick recap of what we've spoken about. Why do we use feature toggles? The main thing we want to do is integrate our code early and often as we can, and get our code out to production as fast as we can. We want to reduce that risk of releasing code. So we want to make releasing not scary. We want turning a feature on to be as simple as flipping a switch, and it's available. The code's been out already. And using these techniques, we can safely manage those feature rollouts of our code. If you want to dive deeper into any of this, Martin Fowler has an article on his blog, because of course he does. Atlassian has some great stuff about how it can fit into your CI/CD pipeline. Not unsurprisingly, Launch Darkly also have a lot of resources on feature toggling and why it's really, really good. It's probably in their best interests to say so. And this whole presentation is available on GitHub. It uses a lot of the techniques that I spoke about tonight in the source code for this. The obligatory "we are hiring" slide. So Lexicon is hiring. It's a great place to work. So yeah, if you're interested, go to the careers page, come chat to me at some point. Happy to talk to you. And there's a heap of Lexicon people here tonight that you can chat to as well. Are there any questions?
What was the name of the open source one?
Unleash. Oh, the question was, what was the name of the open source version? There are heaps though. There's quite a few out there. Actually, the feature toggling of GitLab is built on top of Unleash, if you've ever used that one. Yep.
Do you have a preferred naming convention when you do your stuff at Lexicon?
Do I have a preferred naming convention when I do my stuff at Lexicon? For feature toggles, specifically? Yeah, so as I said on that slide, if I'm using environment variables, which I generally do, I'll prefix it with feature, so it's really, really clear. And often it'll go like, so feature and then like the sort of grouping, the name of the feature. Let's use like, I don't know, offers, for example, like feature, offers, and then whatever the sub thing that I'm toggling is. So it might be like feature, offers, modal, or something like that. Yep.
How do you evaluate your experiments
How do I evaluate the experiments when I'm doing my feature toggling? I don't. I haven't actually used them for experiments before. The release management is my biggest use case that I've had to date. Yep.
How do you handle E2E testing?
How do I handle E2E testing? Good question. So the difficulty with the E2E testing is how do you turn the feature on and off for different cases of your E2E testing. Two different ways you can do it. You can kind of blindly go features on and say, you know, for my E2E testing, we'll care about feature state only. Alternatively, runtime toggles. So kind of similar, I guess, to what I did in this presentation, where you have the ability to turn the toggles on or off within the application itself without having to update the config. So sort of an override at runtime. You can hook into something like that as a setup in the test, or if you're using Launch Darkly or a tool like that, you could have two different users and have your toggles configured to one user or the other. It's a bit dark, I can't see any more hands. Yell out if you have a question. Nope? All right. That's me done.